Puddle Lane, Jeremy's Ride, Candletown. Can you find Puddle Lane? Jeremy's Ride. It was Friday evening, and the wide-awake mice were in Candletown Market. It's getting dark, said Grandfather Mouse. We must go home. Let me just finish this nut, said Jeremy. You start off and we'll follow, said Chestnut. He had just found another nut too, and he didn't want to leave it. Well, don't be long, said Grandfather Mouse. He led the way across the square. We must go home, said Grandfather Mouse. We can run much faster than Uncle Maximus, said Jeremy. Yes, but we mustn't be long, said Chestnut. Tom Cat comes out in the evening. Jeremy choked on his last piece of nut. All right, he said, when he had recovered his breath. Let's go. Let's go, said Jeremy. They had almost reached the entrance to Puddle Lane when Chestnut stopped. His whiskers twitched. There's someone about, he said. Tomcat sprang out of the shadows and leapt towards them. Run, cried Chestnut, rushing off to one side. Run for your life. Run, cried Chestnut. Puddle Lane. Jeremy raced towards Puddle Lane. Tomcat stopped for a second. He wasn't sure which mouse to follow. Then he sprang after Jeremy. The second's pause had given Jeremy just time to reach the archway that led to Puddle Lane. If he had tried to run through it, Tomcat would have caught him, but he didn't. He ran up the wall of the archway as fast as he could. Jeremy ran up the wall. Tomcat leapt up after him, but Jeremy was just out of reach. Tomcat fell back to the ground. Jeremy scrambled up the old wall, clinging to the cracks between the stones, until he came to the windowsill. He looked down. Tomcat was standing there, watching him and slowly twitching his tail from side to side. Jeremy looked down. That was a near thing, said a squeaky little voice in his ear. Jeremy jumped round and saw a little mouse looking out of a hole between two stones. You'd better come inside, said the mouse. I know Tomcat. He'll just sit there and wait for you. Jeremy looked down. Tomcat was sitting on the stones below, looking up. Jeremy looked down. Jeremy shivered and followed the mouse through the hole. He found himself in the room over the archway leading to Puddle Lane. The room was empty, and there were cobwebs on the windows. I'm Whiskers, said the mouse, as soon as Jeremy was safely inside. I live here. I thought mice were called after the names of trees, said Jeremy. Would mice have names like that, said Whiskers. I'm a house mouse. I have a proper mouse name and a proper house to live in. I don't live outside in the rain. I'm Whiskers, said the mouse. I live in the magician's garden, said Jeremy, and I've got to get home. I should stay here till morning if I were you, said Whiskers. If you go now, Tomcat will be waiting for you. But if I'm not home soon, Grandfather will come to look for me, said Jeremy, and Tomcat will see him. Grandfather would never get away from Tomcat. He can't run fast enough. Whiskers ran up the wall on the far side of the room and looked out of another window, up Puddle Lane. Whiskers ran up the wall. Just come and have a look, he said. Jeremy ran across the room and climbed up beside him. What did I tell you, said Whiskers. Tomcat's there, waiting. Jeremy looked down. Tomcat had come through the archway and was watching him from inside Puddle Lane. Jeremy looked down. But I've got to get home, said Jeremy. There's one way you might manage it, said Whiskers. That is, if you're not too frightened. What's that? Asked Jeremy. I saw the magician go into the square a little while ago, said Whiskers. He'll come home this way soon. You could jump down on his hat as he comes through the archway and get a ride home. He'd never notice you. I have got to get home, said Jeremy. I'll try, said Jeremy. You've got to do more than just try, said Whiskers. If you miss, you'll land on the ground and Tomcat will get you. Jeremy shivered. I think I can do it, he said. Grandfather will be coming soon. This way, then, said Whiskers. He led the way to a little hole between two stones. Whiskers led the way to a little hole. The two mice crept through the hole and out onto the windowsill. The moon was shining down, and Jeremy could see Tomcat watching them from the stones below. Listen, said Whiskers. Here's the magician. Jeremy heard slow footsteps coming over the stones. He felt almost too frightened to move. Jeremy saw Tomcat. He looked down and saw the magician's flat hat below him. Now, squeaked Whiskers, jump! Jeremy jumped. He felt himself falling through the air, and for one dreadful moment he thought that he had missed. Jeremy jumped. Then his feet landed on the magician's hat, and he held on with all his claws. His heart was beating so loudly that it sounded like a drum banging in his ears. Jeremy landed on the magician's hat. When he had recovered a little, he looked around him. He was going down Puddle Lane at a steady pace on the magician's head. He looked back. The lights in the houses shone through the windows, and he could see quite well. Tomcat was creeping after them in the shadows at the side of the lane. His eyes were on Jeremy. Jeremy looked back. Jeremy wasn't cold, but he found himself shivering. They came to the gates of the magician's garden. As the magician turned to shut the gate, he saw Tomcat. Shoo, scat, be off with you, cried the magician. The magician saw Tomcat. Tomcat stopped. Scat, cried the magician again. He snapped his fingers. A little ball of fire fell into the lane just in front of Tomcat. Tomcat turned and fled. He ran back down the lane as fast as he could run, with a little ball of fire chasing after him. Tomcat ran back down the lane. The magician laughed and snapped his fingers again. The ball of fire disappeared. Jeremy didn't wait. As quick as a flash, he jumped onto the gate and ran down the gate to the garden. Jeremy ran down the gate. As he got to the hollow tree, he met Grandfather Mouse. Jeremy, cried Grandfather, I'm so glad to see you. Chestnut came home without you. He came home the back way. I was just coming to see where you were. I'm so glad to be home, said Jeremy, still shivering. I've had such an adventure. Come inside and tell us all about it, said Grandfather. You're quite safe now. And he followed Jeremy into the hole under the hollow tree. Jeremy met Grandfather Mouse.